Welcome to our last method seminar of the year. So today we're very fortunate to have Dr. Sean Young. He is one of our methods core scientists. He's also an associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine at UCLA, also the executive director of Institute for Prediction Technology. So he's going to be talking about Twitter, so reading between the tweets, using social media and mHealth to change and predict health behavior. So we're very excited to have Sean, and I'll turn the floor over to him, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer questions as he goes along.
No questions.
No questions. So let me see.
And actually, it's not going to be about Twitter. Well, it'll be partially about Twitter, but I just called it that because as a psychologist, I think the first part of the talk will be on reading between the lines of information, and so reading between the tweets, but it won't be limited to Twitter. We'll talk about a number of different data sources. And so when the talk went out to kind of a broad group, so I designed the talk to be pretty broad and high-level methods, but it's with a smaller, more methods-focused group. What we might want to do, just feel free to stop me and we can dig deeper into the methods, because there's going to be very little data that I actually present here, so we can talk more about methods and things. Okay, so just conflict of interest, we'll talk about Facebook, but there's Facebook and Intel have given funds for things. Okay, so we'll start off with just a background on this. Most of you probably remember a few years ago in this small area in rural Indiana, there was an HIV outbreak where it started off and there were, let's say, 5 people who tested positive for HIV, 5 turned to 10 to 20 to 50 to 100 pretty quickly. In this small area of just 4,000 people, there were 200 people who had tested positive for HIV. And what I think was, there are a number of problems behind this, obviously, and a number of things that needed to be studied. But I think it's a really great example of one of the major problems that we have across public health, and that's the lag time in getting access to data. So in this case here, see 5 people came in, tested positive. Those test results get reported to the county, then to the state, then to the federal government and CDC. But meanwhile, more and more people are contracting HIV, and we're just waiting for data to compile before we can actually figure out what's going on. That's a major problem. So with HIV, for example, we're in 2018, at the end of 2018, I think about it. We're not going to know how many HIV cases occurred this year at a national level until somewhere between 2020 and 2023. It's going to be about a 2 to 5 year time lag typically, and so it makes it really difficult to develop interventions, especially if something's happening in real time and you don't even know about it, how do you address it? And that's an ongoing problem that we faced when we were talking about impact before. So we'll talk about that, and that's one of the primary use cases that I always have in the back of my mind when we're trying any type of methodology or study that we're doing, of how can we solve that problem. I think it's an important, impactful, interesting problem. So today we'll talk about 2 things. One, we'll definitely get to the first. We'll see if we get to the second one. First one is using technologies and technology data, like Twitter data, to predict people's behavior and events related to public health. You might have heard of that, called either prediction technology or behavioral insights and big data. And then the second area will be using technologies to change behavior. So we'll start with this first one, technologies to predict events and outcomes. All right, who knows what is this picture of?
Moneyball.
Moneyball. Yes. Okay. What's Moneyball about?
Predictive analytics.
Predictive analytics. Okay.
The Oakland A's used how the Oakland A's, right?
Oakland A's
using predictive analytics to improve the team performance.
Yes. So it's funny. Each time I give the talk, different people give different explanations of what it's about. I talk to data people, it's about data or predictive analytics or things. If I talk to people in sports, they'll say it's about baseball, and then in Northern California, they're always like, it's how the A's became a winning team. So yes, the idea, this was a book or movie that talked about, so Billy Beane, who is the coach for the A's, wanted to put together a winning team. They were just a terrible team. They were not doing well, and he wanted to change things around by putting together a winning team. So he hires a statistician, played here in the movie by Jonah Hill, and who looks at baseball players' stats and tries to figure out, let's recruit this person, that person, and it works. They ended up being really successful. But that was more than 15 years ago. So data have changed a lot since then. Technologies have changed a lot. We have access to more data than we've ever had before. We have all kinds of novel statistical and technical approaches for analyzing data. So how's it different now? Well, if we talk about, every day there are 500 million tweets that are sent every day. Granted, about 400 million come from President Trump, but that still leaves 100 million for the rest of us. There are every day 55 million status updates on Facebook. And those are just the big social media sites. If we look to the smaller ones, every day 700 million snaps sent. 70 million.
Carla is responsible.
Okay, there you go. 700 million. 70 million perfectly filtered Instagram photos sent every day. When I first started getting into this work, and this was back when Facebook had come out, 2004, there was a lot of discussion around, why would anyone use this? Who cares what I had for breakfast, and why would they follow or why would they listen? But now, if people are not sharing anything and everything, we know that there's a problem out there because things have changed. So question is, are people just sharing meaningless information on social media, or are they sharing information that's actually helpful for solving public health problems? And so that's what we began studying this 2012, about 2011, and we turned to things like Twitter to take a look. So for example, we found that they are sharing information that's relevant to public health. They'll tell you that they're drunk driving publicly, telling the world. They'll tell you they're really trying to have sex tonight.
That's not me.
See, this is a bot. I told you about getting hacked. Someone hacked Jay's account. No, I thought this is Jay at home. No? They'll tell you about getting checked for STDs and their experiences. They'll tell you the drugs that they're using. And they'll talk to you about personal issues related to stigma and experiences with HIV. So all very relevant to public health and helping to address some of the issues around it. So if we go back to this problem here, which is there's a 2 to 5 year time lag in collecting data, and typically what we do as researchers, we create studies, intervention studies that take 1.5 to 5, 6, 10 years to complete before we can analyze the results of it. We'll do surveys. We'll send surveys out to people. We'll have interviews, but those take a long time. Here we have, with social media data, we have something that's occurring in real time. People are naturally, organically sharing it, and they're telling us about things that are relevant to this issue right here. So the question is, initially that we had, could we use this information to help address this time lag and even get an estimate in real time or even prediction of HIV cases we might see. So I'm going to walk through the very first study that we did on this, and we can dig deeper here. These were very early methods, and so you'll notice a bunch of flaws with the early methods, but it's a pretty simple study, so we'll give you the idea behind it. So we collected 500 million tweets on Twitter. This was 500 million over a 6-month period, and then we broke them down into tweets that were HIV related or not, either substance or sex related or just general, so sex related tweets, people saying, I need sex now, or anybody want to get high, and then the general ones were, I'm watching the Celtics game. So we had, out of those 500 million, there were about 10,000 tweets that were focused on these types of HIV-related topics. And then with Twitter data, it's geotagged. It has a location on it. And so we map these tweets on a US map to figure out where are people talking about these types of topics. Specifically, what counties are they, where are they discussing things that suggest they may be at risk for HIV?
So Sean, on the methodology side, I'm assuming you use algorithms to pull out certain keywords to categorize them, or how did that take place?
Yeah, so we identified, actually this first one, it was pure, we just came up with a list of keywords.
Okay.
Yeah, very simple. Let's see what happens here. Let's more on the, and again, as a psychologist, that's the interesting, I mean, we can get kind of off on the side of where do machines and humans interact with each other and what happens. But as psychologists, I think the person informing the machine about new types of topics, and that's, I think, an interesting area.
You said the time frame was like 6 months?
6 months, yeah.
So the sex and drug-related tweets, you said it was like 10,000 out of like how
500 million.
500 million?
Well, 500 million total. 2.1 million were location.
Okay.
So it's 10,000 out of 2.1 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
On the, am I right that not all tweets are geocodable?
Correct. So 2.1. We had 2.1 million out of 500 million that were. All of them are geocodable, geotaggable, but it's in the user settings of whether they provide that or not. There've been since then. There've been more recently different types of methods being developed which actually can, with about 60% of tweets can be assigned a location. That's with different types of learning going on. So even if typically 1 to 2% of tweets are tagged where the user is willing to provide their location data, but new models have been developed so that about 60% of the data can be inferred, location can be inferred. Yeah. So anyway, so these were the 10,000 tweets which suggest people in these areas are engaging or talking about engaging in behaviors that would put them at risk for HIV. And then we have maps, actually, data of HIV cases, and put these two together to merge the counties, and we found that the counties where people are talking about things that suggest they're at risk for HIV, the same counties where we're finding, where we were finding a higher number of HIV cases. So that was the first study just in looking at these types of methods and how they could be used, and then, but there are a lot of limitations we could talk about with the study. I mean, we had other covariates like Gini index, a measure of poverty and inequality. We looked at, we had population and frequency of tweeting and things like that as covariates, but still there were some big limitations of this study, and so we've gone on to use a variety of new methods and enhance the methods for this type of work. But this is where I'll, in the talk now, I'm going to talk about other types of applications that we've done and how we've done this work, but it will get to even a higher level now from here, so you can stop me at any time if you want to go deeper into the methods or anything. So that actually led to the formation of our Institute for Prediction Technology, where we have a mix of people from all different types of academic backgrounds in so public health and medicine and computer science and statistics, and in trying to solve a lot of different real-world problems. So I'm now going to give an example of some of these different types of problems we've tackled. So one of them that I'll talk about was a partnership with UCLA Intel, with Chancellor Block here, who's interested in sleep research. And so we worked with him in Intel. We gave incoming freshman students, we gave them wearable devices to track sleep and activity, collect data. We followed them on Twitter, so we recruited students who were tweeting a few times a week. Then we gave students weekly surveys to assess their stress, mental health, physical activity, things like that, and academic performance for the first quarter of this was back at 2015. And what we found is that using the Twitter data alone, just looking at the topics people were discussing, we could be able, so they'd complete these weekly surveys where they talk about how stressed out they were, things like that. But just using the Twitter data alone, we were able to predict their responses at the end of the week to how well they slept that week, quality of sleep, how many hours, how stressed out they were, things like that. And so it was a lot of data where we could get insights from Twitter. And then with that, we developed applications that pull the Twitter data and can be able to, in real time, be able to provide insights into how are students feeling at any given time.
And go to MIT.
Sure. Stay away from MIT. So that's an example of an application built on things like this.
On that, how big is that range that is between 70 and 90, basically? Is that, like the question might be how clinically significant is that? It looks pretty big. What is like MIT?
Yeah, I wouldn't, so this is an application, but I still think of this as a gadget. The analyses and the papers that we did, those are, I can talk more in detail about those, but this is based on sentiment, so it's based on how they're feeling, and really the only one that would be accurate is UCLA, because that's based on actual UCLA student data. For the rest of these, we just we took like hashtag Yale or hashtag, we don't even know if these are actual students, so I wouldn't read too much into this, but this is the type of application or things that can be developed from this that we built. We have a tool like this, but UCLA is actually interested in using, and we've been with the one that we have that's based on actual UCLA student data. Okay, and this is shifting topics. This one, so Facebook is interested in online safety, and here's an example of a student. So this was a student who was expressing things that showed he was having some problems. He was experiencing mental health issues. He needed some help. He didn't get the help that he needed, and a month after this happened, there was an incident where he killed 3 of his classmates and killed himself. This one, whenever I present this one gets to me. We have the ability to collect data like this and to analyze it in real time and to act on it. We need to be using methods like we need to be using data like this to be able to prevent things like this from happening. These are preventable. People are publicly telling the world that they need help, and it's searchable, and we need to take action on things like this. Other types of work, ways to apply this. So we've been we worked with the CDC on predicting syphilis. So with syphilis, we got weekly syphilis data, and we're able to predict weekly rates of syphilis. So Rob and his student, Neil, that's right, yeah, Neil, we did something with looking at Twitter, similar to the HIV one. We looked at predicting syphilis. We've also done some other work looking at Google search data and how we have a partnership with Google and use that for predicting syphilis. We have partnerships with Waze and the California Highway Patrol. We just did something recently looking at Waze data, and a problem there is that when the problem we were trying to address is in a car crash, there's a delay in getting first responders onto the scene of a car accident. So someone may be in an accident, you call 911, gets routed to a 911 operator, they take down some notes, dispatch it to a paramedic or a CHP or police who then comes onto the scene. Well, if you could save 40 seconds off that time getting someone to the first responder scene, you could save tens of thousands of lives. By working with Waze and looking at Waze reported data, we were able to develop models where we can anticipate car crashes or find car crashes 3.5 to 4 minutes faster than the current methods are being used. We also had talked about Twitter, and then you can use dating app data. And
so
then
California Highway Patrol, like currently, are they using Waze?
No, they're not. So we've now done these models and worked with them on it, and now they're considering integrating things like that into there. Yeah. So with this type of information, you can then build applications like this. We built this. This is broadly called Cloudberry, and we've created something called HIV Map. And with HIV Map, this is a map of the United States, and it pulls from, this was what I was mentioning, it's now up to about 1.5 billion tweets, and you can see in real time, and you can zoom in at a county or city level and see where are people talking about certain topics. You can look at PrEP, you can look at HIV testing, and see the types of tweets that people are talking about, and we've built heat maps and different types of mapping tools, and we're working with AIDS directors from around the country to implement this type of work in their HIV/AIDS prevention. Another example, in a partnership with Google, we collected data on Google searches for opioids. So these were prescription and non-prescription opioids. So anything from methadone to China White. And then we merged that with data from emergency department visits for heroin. And what we found were that in the cities where there were spikes in searches on Google for prescription or non-prescription opioids, that 1 year later we saw spikes in those same cities for emergency department visits for heroin. So showing that Google search data and data like this could be an example of an additional tool could be used to address the opioid crisis. And again, there's a lag time in opioid data reporting. All right, so we'll switch to now the technologies to change health behaviors. So it's too boring for you? I told her I was going to call her out on that one. For those of you who know me and know our work here, we actually started off and started this at CHIPS with online communities for HIV behavior change, HIV testing. And so that's the ultimate goal of all of this. Why are we trying to make these predictions and better understand data so that ultimately we can feed back into interventions so that if we can identify a problem faster, then we can apply interventions to help address that problem and prevent public health problems. So we'll talk here about some of our work on behavior change technologies. The primary one, we have Stephanie over here who runs our HOPE intervention. The HOPE intervention stands for Harnessing Online Peer Education. And this is, initially we were doing this on Facebook, and this is, the idea is that in public health, there had been established studies where if you have peer role models, if you have people in a certain area like who have successfully, they promote condom use, they can get others, their peers, to be using condoms as well. Well, we wanted to apply that model online as social media had started to grow, and so those were our first studies in this area. The idea behind it is that you have a group of peer role models. This is based loosely on the CPOL model, which has been worked on a lot here at CHIPS and throughout the office. So you have peer role models, and those peer role models, the way we apply it online is that we'll have closed private online community groups, and the peer role models will be assigned to participants, and they will then teach the other participants, model for them behavior change. And in most of these cases, it's focused on increasing HIV testing. So we'll try to recruit. So here's one where we recruited African American and Latino MSM, and we were able to, through this online community HOPE intervention, we were able to successfully get participants who are at risk for HIV, minority MSM, to request and test for HIV self-testing kits. And we've applied this in different areas and in different types of disease areas, which I'll talk about in a minute. But one of the things about online community studies is that there's a lot of data that come along with it. So you have your traditional surveys that you can administer. You collect HIV testing data, but you also have participants' discussions on these online communities. So this right here, we identified the topics that people discussed over 12 weeks during the intervention, and we've kept these studies open. People continue talking on them, and so we could go back and look. Because one of the really exciting things about it is that we create these organic communities. We create them from scratch. They're owned then by the participants, and they can use them however they want. But we'll look back and see what are the topics discussed over that intervention period. And what you'll notice, each one of these columns is 4 weeks of the 12-week intervention. So you'll see, for example, not surprising, in the first 4 weeks, most of the conversations are friendly conversations. People just saying, hey, what are you guys up to this weekend? How are you doing? Why are we in this study? When are we getting paid? Maybe not as friendly, but and other type, or sharing cat videos and all kinds of random things. But you'll see that over time, each subsequent 4 weeks, the friendly conversations decrease proportionally, and the conversations around HIV prevention and testing increase, showing the success and effectiveness of the intervention in achieving what we want in really destigmatizing HIV and HIV testing and getting people to talk about testing.
One question, it seems like, even though these are impressive, it also seems like the effectiveness is limited. Would that be a fair statement? I mean, 20 versus 30%, or 20-something versus 30-something% on the HIV STI.
Yeah, so these are it's qualitative data, so I don't really think about it in terms of effectiveness as much as I think there are a few insights that I take home from this. One, like I said, the intervention is doing what it's supposed to do because discussions about testing are increasing over time. Second, I think it's just informative, that it teaches us what are people engaged in discussing, which this can help with future and other interventions to focus on these types of topics, let's say, that are engaging. And then third, I think what this ultimately sparked all of the work that I just presented earlier, because what we noticed is that surprisingly, this is, let's say, 12% of conversations, this is 10%. But in the first 4 weeks, people are having they're surprisingly frequently discussing with strangers a lot of really personal things. And at the time, this was 2009, 2010, it was really surprising that with strangers, they were talking about what it was like when they first came out, or that they hadn't come out to anyone else before. So that actually led to a lot of that was the impetus for doing these studies I presented earlier. For if we're seeing this on closed online communities, what if we look to public things like Twitter? Are people still going to be sharing this information? We found that they are. You can also, more qualitative data, these are examples of the types of conversations people have on these online communities. These are posts from participants, not the peer leaders, but you can see these participants take on the role of peer leaders. So here's a participant saying, I tend to feel that despite it all, being a part of the group would inspire each of us to get tested. I agree it's a personal responsibility, but on some level I feel it's a social one as well. Despite whatever your reasoning, it will remain a private matter unless you choose to divulge it with the group. But for all those who haven't, knowing is worth it in the end. Let's just do it. That's someone taking on the role of a peer leader, trying to encourage others to get tested. You can also do different types of network analyses. So because these studies are done and you can track their friends and who they become friends with whom over time, you can track those changes. So it's hard to see from here because it's compacted together, but the take home from here is that each one of these colors is a different cluster, it's a different group, and from baseline to follow-up, what we see is that the intervention groups, so these two I believe are the intervention groups. The intervention groups, at baseline there are a few ties across clusters, across groups, which we expect as we're trying to just randomly assign people and don't want them to know each other necessarily. But over time, we find that within the intervention groups, there are more connections made among participants, and that making more connections with your peers is associated with, I believe, 11 times the odds of requesting an HIV testing kit. So you can get different types of data and results like that to help inform intervention development and delivery. Like I said, so not just in the United States. Here's an example in Peru with a larger sample. The first one was about 120. This is 556. Similar idea, Peruvian MSM with the HOPE study. We've applied this to other areas outside of HIV. We just finished a study with UCLA chronic pain patients on opioids. And here's an example. We've built this, helped build this health check-ins platform, which incorporates the lessons that we've learned from the online community study in order to be able to deliver online communities more broadly using this peer intervention approach. Just before wrapping up, here's some other research on behavior change technologies. So we've been working with vending machines to distribute HIV testing kits. Been working on methods for Hep C testing. We've been applying these online community approaches for undergraduates, underage drinking. This is with the University of Michigan. And then a core part of the work that we're doing is on ethical issues around this. And this is kind of an ongoing thing, both from the first part of the studies that I mentioned as well as these, interviewing people, surveying them, and finding out what are their perceptions and views that we are collecting their online data, that we're using it to make predictions about them. How do they feel about this? In some cases, we're consenting them because they're individuals. In other cases, it's theoretically public information, and so we can just pull it and do what we want with it. How do they feel about that? And in general, the response that we get back is every company is doing this right now. Facebook knows what I'm about to type before I finish typing it. Google knows what I'm searching for before I finish searching it. You go to CVS and they can suggest products for me to buy. So given that companies are already using these methods, you as public health researchers, presumably doing this for our public good, we support you on it. Finally, I'll mention we just had a hackathon focused on the opioid crisis. This was pretty exciting, where we had a group of key stakeholders, key government stakeholders across federal level, like we had the Chief Data Officer of U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We had at a state level, California Department of Public Health and California Highway Patrol. Local level, we had the District Attorney of Los Angeles, of Orange County, and they helped advise and be a part of this event where we presented teams with 4 different problems related to the opioid crisis. Teams formed together, they competed against each other for 24 hours to develop solutions to the opioid crisis. And we're studying the implementation science behind this. So we are giving surveys and interviews and following up with winning teams and other participants to see what is the impact of an event like this, and how can we improve events like this potentially to apply it to other areas like HIV in the future. And I've got a long list of collaborators across these different studies, and just want to thank everyone, and thanks for having me here.